Hello everyone, my name is Marina Frid. I am a postdoctoral researcher in communication and culture at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro and a member of the Anthropology of Consumption Lab, which is a research group coordinated by Professors Everardo Rocha and Bruno Alcar of the Department of Social Communication at the Pontifical Catholic University of Rio de Janeiro, otherwise known as PUC-Rio. Today, I'll have the privilege of talking to Dr. Timothy Malefyt about his work and professional journey. Dr. Malefyt is clinical professor at the Gabelli School of Business, Fordham University in New York City. Previously, he held senior positions in advertising agencies such as Vice President and Director of Cultural Discoveries for BBDO worldwide, where he applied anthropological and cultural approaches to consumer research for developing brand and strategic insights. Dr. Malefyt has co-authored and co-edited multiple academic press books such as Ethics in the Anthropology of Business and Advertising and Anthropology. His latest book is Women, Consumption, and Paradox, which he co-edited with Dr. Marian McCabe. Professor Malefyt, thank you for joining me today.
Oh, Marina and Everardo, I want to thank you both very much for inviting me to this, and I'm very happy to be here to speak with you today.
I'm very happy to be here with you. So I want to start by asking what drove you to pursue a PhD in cultural anthropology? And following up on that question, what was your PhD research about?
Yes, we all have these, I guess you call them origin stories. You know, you have that in startups and all that are origin stories. Of course, for me, it was my last year, senior year in undergrad. I was a psychology major, and I took one anthropology course, and it blew me over. The professor, the subject matter, and I remember, I don't know if you're familiar with these, Barbara Meyerhoff wrote an article on peyote symbol complex in Mexico. So she was looking at the peyote tradition of taking peyote and getting hallucinogens from this and going out on excursions and what that meant. And then Victor Turner wrote Betwixt and Between. I read this too, on liminality and rites of passage. And relating that to, our professor related that to college experience and other types of experiences where we are subject to liminality and where rules don't apply, where we go through different rituals that transform us. And those two readings, I think especially, really affected me. And I then went to Brown University for my PhD work in anthropology. So my background is, again, different. I danced ballet for a number of years with the Joffrey Ballet. And I went to Brown because I was interested in performance in culture, performance studies. So my work at Brown as an anthropologist in my dissertation work was really on, I went to Spain and studied flamenco performance, and that was my dissertation work, nothing to do with business, although it actually has a lot to do with business. Flamenco and bullfighting are two very popular venues, bullfighting less so now, but in the 1990s when I went to Spain, they were very popular traditions. And Spain, I don't know, like in Brazil, the population in the summertime actually doubles. You have 38 million and it goes to like 60, 70, 80 million people from all the tourists coming to Spain, and they want to see flamenco performance, flamenco and bullfighting. So I looked at the tourist experience of flamenco and compared that to how purists in the aficionados in the peñas, clubs, how they experience flamenco and what was el flamenco puro and what was for tourism. I looked at contrast there. So I was actually, one of the things I was looking at is what makes performance charismatic, charisma in performance. And many performance forms have a term for when performances are very good. And in flamenco, you talk about, and in the bullfight, duende is a term that arises in the connection between the performer and the audience. when a performance is really great. So that was one thing I was studying, very interesting in my dissertation work. But when I graduated in 97, jobs in anthropology, academic positions were about zero. I sent out many resumes and CVs and just found no job. And it was actually a recruiter in New York City. I was in Michigan at the time. My wife was working at Ford Motor Company, and she's from Spain, by the way, so there was a connection there. I sent my resume to a recruiter, and he said, this is terrible, the way you've written this. He helped me rewrite my CV into a resume, and then he said, well, you have experience in symbols. He said, there's a ad agency that's looking for a different kind of account planner, a strategic planner, and I applied for that, and they flew me out to New York, and I applied for the job, and I got there. So it was very, serendipitous that I got the job in advertising. I started in a small shop in New York, Averitt Free Ginsburg, and I worked on a rental car company and Crayola crayons. Was there for a couple of years, and then worked in Detroit, moved back for, my wife moved with me, but we moved back again to Detroit. I worked on Darcy on Cadillac. And then it was really my long time, 10 years at BBDO in New York as a vice president director of consumer insights. And that's really where I did most of my work.
I just thought it was so interesting, your PhD research. And you briefly mentioned that it has to do with business in a way, dance. And could you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So again, flamenco, it's really a song style and has dance with it, but most people think of it mostly as a dance form. And it's popular. So, the research question from an anthropological point of view is that flamenco, kind of like the blues you have in the U.S., is started from a marginalized group, the Gitanos, the Gypsies. Really originated flamenco performance. It's a song style that expresses a lot of the suffering, the discrimination that Gypsies have had, the loss that they've had, and it's expressed in dance form too. But even though, and the Gypsies are mostly in the south of Spain and Andalusia, but even though it comes from that region of Spain, it's popular all over Spain. So in Barcelona, in Galicia, that has not much to do with it. Flamenco is everywhere. And that's where the tourism comes. And what is it that makes flamenco spectacular? Often is the dance, and it's blended with other forms. When I was there, Joaquin Cortez was a famous dancer. He was actually from the Ballet Nacional de España, and he danced. He was a Gitano gypsy, and he danced flamenco. And he left the ballet company and became a famous flamenco dancer. And he incorporated a lot of ballet moves into it. So, in a sense, tourists love that very dramatic expression. This is after you had Berezhnikov and other great male dancers who were kind of macho and showed this bravismo in their dance. And he made flamenco even more and more popular as a dance form. So the idea of what is extravagant and spectacular, not so much heartfelt song music, but in the dance, is what really made flamenco big and appealed as a business to many places.
And so you started out, you met a recruiter someone who recruited you to, could you, I'm sorry.
Elaborate on that, sure. So yeah. You have, I don't know, in business you know them as, the vernacular is headhunters, but they're, recruiters are people who place people in jobs. And this man was from he wouldn't normally, I don't know, remember how I got his name, but he wouldn't normally work with an academic, but you never know the connections you have. And his daughter had danced at the Joffrey, and his daughter had also gone to Brown, so we had two connections. And so he picked up my CV and he wanted to work with me. He helped reshape it into a better resume, and I applied for this job. So, yeah, I mean, you know, when you're looking for a job, you always have to spin the job in the direction of the need that it's trying to fit. You try to, you rewrite it, and that's what he had done, helped me do that. So it sounded less academic and more like a business job that I was applying for. And that was my start in advertising.
And what did your anthropological training bring to the positions you occupied in advertising agencies?
Good question. Yes, I mean, anthropology is great, we know, anthropological training, and it works so well in a business setting. And I think some of the ideas in anthropology, especially the idea of holism, the relatedness of things, that was really useful. When we'd study cooking, for instance, we'd see that it's not just a mother for Campbell's Soup, one of our big clients. It wasn't just sourcing ideas, what she had in the kitchen. She was going online, she'd talk to friends, she'd go to the store. This whole network of relatedness applied to help our studies better. So the idea of holism, the idea of comparison, also this is helpful in business. You look at different markets, what's happening in one place in the US versus another place. Comparison is really helpful. The member's point of view is really critical in anthropology. We learned this EMIC approach. That was helpful. Consumers don't talk like marketers, so how do consumers think and feel? Very descriptive. And then the whole idea of inductive reasoning, letting ideas come up from observations. I think that really helped inform the research in business. And then in the marketing world that we had, we then take these concepts and apply them. We study further. We could do quantitative work on some of the ideas we had, but it was really, really helpful to have this kind of approach. And a lot of other businesses hadn't used this before. So I created a strong field, a strong department within BBDO, especially for this.
Yeah, that's just what I was thinking. Did BBDO or other advertising agencies use anthropological knowledge already? Was that a part of their strategy?
Well, you know, the whole ethnography thing really took off. Everyone, after a while, and I was there from 2003 to 2012, and everyone used ethnography at the time. So it kind of became, I wrote an article in the American Anthropological Association meeting about this, how it became commercialized, and you'd give everyone a camera or give everyone a phone and they'd go out and do quick ethnographies. It became so popular that it kind of lost some of the focus of using holism, comparison, member's point of view, and so forth. So that's the downside of it. But developing that at BBDO, we had a great client base, and it became like a business within the agency. So it worked really, really well. It was very, very helpful.
Oh, just adding to that question, was it usual to have actual anthropologists involved?
No, at that time it was not at all. There are still not too many anthropologists who work at a senior level in advertising, so that was a really unique position. The trend has moved on more towards some more quantitative and using social media, less of the ethnographic approach, but it was really, really big in the 2000s, and I still see value to that. I train students in marketing now at Fordham University to take on some of these anthropological approaches. You can apply this to online work as well. There's the whole ethnography as an approach. You can do ethnographic work online as well. But the way you do approach in anthropology, the holism, the description, the comparison, the member's point of view, these are powerful. The whole importance of context, how context informs everything else. These are things that are valuable to learn in any kind of research, online or offline.
I was wondering if it's not too much to ask, if you could give an example of a research you conducted, a campaign that was based on your research.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And I think this is one of your questions. How does a corporate experience inform your research? One thing it's great now being back in academia is that I have more time to write on it. When you're in business, you have short ethnographies, you're really whipping through stuff, and you'd love to go deeper, and you really can't. You're giving client top line ideas, and you're moving the business along, but you don't have time to really reflect on it. And some of the things, a number of projects I think that I've rewritten about lately, I've done much more reflective thought. Revlon, we did a study for Revlon in cosmetics, and Revlon, the company, wanted to talk about how Revlon is about, attracting a man. It's Love Is On was the campaign. And our research showed that I had women anthropologists go out and talk with other women. It was really more about how they felt about themselves, how women, makeup was something they did for themselves, and almost like having coffee made them feel more alive, more awake. They would change their makeup according to who they were seeing and how they were going out. It was a much more reflective, comparing in a sense. We heard women talk about the inside of how I feel with how I want to create the outside, and meshing these two. So we didn't give all that to Revlon in our final results, but we later wrote about this in a paper which was much deeper. Here's another example, Campbell's and creativity. Campbell's Soup was one of our big clients at BBDO, and they always they referenced cooking for mothers as the dinner dilemma, as a problem, the dinner dilemma. And when we went out, Marianne McCabe was one of the anthropologists who worked with me on this. We'd go to women's homes, we'd go to homes and watch cooking and spend time with them. And instead of a dilemma, we saw a lot of innate creativity at work. There's always a little adjustments and a tuning to who's going to dinner, or trying something new, or adding something slightly different this time to the recipe. So the idea of dilemma kind of presets the idea that cooking is a drag and hassle every day. It's kind of looking backwards at it. But when we were with women and they're doing it, it's more like a forward-looking thing, and they're much more enthusiastic about it. And it's a good sense of connecting with your skills with each member of the family, and how you can adjust food for them and make pleasing meals for everyone. So we saw it as a much more positive experience. This is something that we wrote about. This is, again, where anthropology nicely informs the research. And when you're an academic, now I'm back in academia, I can reflect on this and write about it and spend more time thinking about it.
So how was that transition from industry back to academia? How did that go about?
Great question. Well, the writing's on the wall. You get in your 50s, and then you know that in the business world and advertising especially, all your peers are in their 20s, and even the 30-year-olds are considered old. Fortunately, I was a researcher, so that was okay. But I had an offer to go back and teach. I had been teaching as an adjunct at Parsons School of Design, and Fordham came and had an offer, so I jumped at the opportunity. I had been publishing more and more, and they liked some of these ideas. They also liked the idea of doing a business anthropology in the business school. So here are a couple of things I wanted to mention about. I learned when you're in business, you're very focused on what you're doing. It's very intense. You're busy. You're working weekends. There's so much going on. You don't really have a time to pull back and reflect. And when I got back into academia, I learned more about business than when I was in business in some ways, because in a way, teaching it to others, you have to rethink about what you're doing and put it in a different context. Like, I never really thought, what is marketing? Advertising marketing. I think it's kind of creating and selling goods. No, the textbook definition is, you're really creating and maintaining value through developing relationships. And it's a company developing relationships with its customer base. This creates value that is mutual and interchange. Companies produce something that the consumer wants, the consumer likes the product and gives loyalty back to the company. This is the idea of value. I never thought about that in business, but as an academic now thinking about it and teaching to others, I think more about it. So in some ways, coming back to academia has made me a better business person. I can think more about it.
When I meant actual anthropologists working in advertising agencies, I meant people as students with young professionals with anthropological training. So is that something that you do nowadays in academia? Is that a part of your work?
Well, I teach in a business school, Gabelli School of Business in Fordham University, and in the marketing department. And I have classes in consumer insights. I wouldn't call that anthropology, so to speak, but it's really looking at how do you develop these consumer insights. And I use a lot of anthropological theory. I have them read books in anthropology. And I think it really does inform the students better. I've had a number of students who want to go on and take classes in anthropology and learn more about anthropology. So it's very helpful. I only worry, I think anthropologists have to get over this fear and concern and strong dislike of capitalism. And sometimes that is a wall. I go to the anthropology meetings, and I think anthropologists everywhere think of capitalism as something bad and evil. And it's really not. It's something that we as anthropologists can work to help ameliorate some of these problems and make it better for businesses to become more ethical. And Bob Moraes and I actually wrote a book on ethics, and we invited other scholars to talk about ethics because we don't see value in criticizing and staying away from business as anthropologists. I think anthropologists have a lot to offer businesses.
About that book that you wrote with Robert Moraes, could you talk a little bit more about how anthropology can contribute to better business practices? Sure,
I'd be happy to. I wrote down a couple of things here. I just wrote, one of my favorite authors is Tim Ingold. He's written a lot. He's really great. He has a new book out. I would recommend this for students. Anthropology, Why It Matters. It's a pretty recent book. And in that, it was something I pulled out that I wanted to share here now because it's so different from what business is. He says, anthropology doesn't tell you what you want to know. It unsettles foundations of what you think you know, that you already knew. In other words, anthropology provides no answers. And that's maybe a problem. Anthropology is really good at dissecting, showing how complex things are, exposing issues, but it doesn't tell you what to do. An anthropologist will not tell you what to do. Whereas in business, it's all about telling you what to do. There are always the idea of goals and objectives and setting an agenda. Business is about creating change. Anthropology doesn't want to make a change because it's afraid that the whole ethics in anthropology is do no harm. That means to step back. And Bob and I and others have said, no, let's do some good. Let's take a stand. Even if we're wrong, let's try to make a difference. So the examples that I gave, like with Campbell's Soup, we would go to Campbell's and say, look, no, we think your consumers are more creative than you think, your mothers who are cooking. So let's not call it the dinner dilemma. Let's call it being creative with cooking or having fun with cooking. Turn it to be more positive. So we're trying to influence companies and corporations to be different by giving them more information about their consumer. Or with Revlon, we said, no, women aren't putting makeup on just to attract a man. They're doing it more to feel good about themselves, to draw a sense of confidence for themselves. So those are messages that we try to instill in our work as anthropologists to try to change business. And I think that is ethics. That's a point of taking a stance and trying to make a difference. Companies today are more willing to listen. You know, there's this rise in corporate social responsibility, and there's, I don't know if you've heard the term of pro-social marketing or purpose-driven marketing, but companies are looking for ways to add value. Here's marketing again, add value again to their customers, more than just making a profit. How can they do some good in the world? So I think because companies are looking like Tom's Shoes, you buy a pair of shoes and they give a pair of shoes to a needy, or Warby Parker glasses, for every pair of glasses you buy, they give a pair to somebody else. These are companies that are trying to make a positive difference. And I think, again, anthropologists can come in ethically and make a change for the better in the world. Rather than just criticize capitalism and try to get away from it, I think we should enter it and engage it.
Yes, so that's what I was wondering here is that what discussions are taking place in U.S. academia about this relationship between anthropology and industry? Was there a discussion, or they're just rejected? I don't know, or avoided?
In Brazil too, I think, as in the U.S., some anthropologists are divided, and you have your staunch Marxists who are maybe not happy with anthropologists working in and for business. But there's a strong movement of other anthropologists who are working in business and making change in corporations. So I think this is a business anthropology, I think, is a big future for anthropologists. Working in corporate, working in advertising, understanding marketing. Everardo and you have written great articles on this too. So I think you're at the edge, the forefront here too in Brazil, what's happening, as in the US. And I think businesses will listen. I think there's a sense of, again, businesses wanting to do good, some businesses, and that's where anthropologists can step in and make a difference.
So last May, you launched a book called Women, Consumption, and Paradox, co-edited with Marian McCabe. And so how did you and Marian come to the idea of editing a collection on the mismatches between women's everyday experiences and market representations?
So we came up with this. Actually, we were in, the idea for the book came, we were in Cuba at a conference there, and some of the authors in the book were in Cuba with us, and we had talked about, we looked at this paradox we saw with women consumers. So I worked at BBDO for 10 years in research, talking with consumer research, mostly talking with women. Most of the consumers I talk with are women. Women purchase 70-80% of all items in the world. They're often not recognized for this, but they're the major consumers in the world. Yet marketers are often, like with Revlon or like with Campbell's, marketers are often communicating erroneously to women. They're often giving them messages. Dinner's a hassle. You gotta look beautiful to attract a man. We wanted to take some of these messages that we found that were inconsistent with the research that we did. We wanted to we held a session on this in the Canadian Anthropological Association in Cuba. Then we invited other colleagues to join us for this. But this was our idea that how do women navigate these contradictory messages from marketers? And we discovered that that paradox is not such a bad thing, that we live with these contradictions all the time, mixed marketing messages, consumers, in a sense, there's so much that is unresolved in consumption itself, not only with women's studies, but I did research on the art of shaving, which is a men's shaving product. And marketers love to get to a conclusion. They like to get to a resolve, dialectical. they convince you of an idea, they want to get your business, and they want to make the sale to you. But a lot of the way people use products and brands is kind of partial or incomplete or experimental or unresolved. People mix and match products with the art of shaving. Men add to it, or they like part of the kit but not all of it, or they adapt and modify it. So consumption and the use of products is never holistic and complete. It's often mixed and matched. This idea of latour and the assemblages come together. People use and borrow what they need and they want. So consumers are often living with these contradictions, and they're fine with it. And that's, in a sense, the premise of our book, that women, the number one market for consumers in the world, often live with these ambiguities. And even some of them support the ambiguity. Some women will say, I don't like to have to hold to the beauty regimen, but I'm uncomfortable going outside if I don't put a little makeup on. So they may not like messages about having to look beautiful, but they still feel uncomfortable if they don't put on some makeup going out to the corner store. So women are living with these contradictions. People are living with these contradictions, and we wanted to write about this, that contradictions are not a bad thing. They're actually a form of agency, that's where people can choose and act and make decisions on their own. It keeps the conversation going, so to speak. So that was the idea of the book.
I remember the authors, there's a mix of authors who are currently working in academia, and some authors are working as consultants. Am I right?
Yes. So we have some academics, some consultants, and some like me, Marianne, who are kind of in between doing both. Yes. And you have a chapter in there as well.
Yeah, that was a pleasure to write that chapter. I really enjoyed it, and I'm so happy. I'm just sad we didn't get the book yet.
I know some people have. I haven't received my book yet. I guess the shipping is different times and rates, but you'll get it. Dominique just got his, so hopefully they'll continue coming out.
Great. I was wondering if we could go back just a bit to what we were saying about business anthropology being something that is growing. Is it growing? Is it an area that is actually growing in the U.S.?
It is. Business Anthropology. We have a website, businessanthro.com. Growing. The idea of EPIC is growing. There are publications. Business schools are more open to anthropology, and anthropologists are more open to using business connections. Most anthropologists in the U.S. are not working in academia. I'm sure, as in Brazil, they're working typically for private industry, and a lot of them working for companies. So it's a growing field. We have a series at Rutledge, Business and Anthropology. Rutledge Publishers is growing that section of business anthropology. It is a growing field, and we want to see this grow worldwide. We're hoping it, not just in the U.S., but other countries as well. The whole idea of business anthropology really takes off, perhaps at your university.
I'm sorry, you mentioned the idea of EPIC. Could you talk a little bit more about EPIC? I'm familiar with it, but I think not everyone here is.
Yes, EPIC, Ethnographic Praxis in Industry Conference, or it's now epicpeople.org is a website, and that's a whole community of anthropologists, but some non-anthropologists, people who practice ethnography, but there's papers that are given there, the conferences, publications, and so forth, and that's a growing community. Ken Anderson and Tracy, I forget her last name. They were at Microsoft and Intel. They started this back in 2005, and it's grown since. So it's really taken off. EPIC. That's a community. Businessanthro.com is another website you can look at. There are what else? The Society for Applied Anthropology is SFAA is quite big with business anthropology. There are a number of resources for business anthropologists.
If I'd like just to add one more question before we wrap up,
Sure.
which is a surprise question. I'd like to hear your thoughts on interdisciplinarity and especially the relationship between fields such as anthropology and communication studies.
Yeah, they're very related. I always think of anthropology as offering a set of guidelines. You have the anthropology of. Anthropology can work with anything, with marketing, business, communications, so many different fields because of how it has this, as we talked about, these different approaches. And I think anthropology enhances other practices. So I would imagine the field of communication, media communications, it would strengthen it in how you could look at things from another point of view. The whole EDIC and EMIC framework, the idea of holism, the idea of comparative studies, the idea of the context is how critical. I think these are something that can augment and help other fields of studies as well, very much.
Well, would you like to add anything to our conversation?
We've talked about a lot. I hope this is encouragement for other people to get into anthropology, apply to different fields. I applied it to business. It's been doing very well. I had no idea about doing this. I started off from psychology, dance to anthropology into corporate work. But I think that anthropology is a phenomenal tool. It's a way of thinking. As somebody said, it's more of a philosophy, applied philosophy than anything else. And it looks at the whole human condition. And maybe that's why it's so good for applying to any other fields, including communication. So I hope other people take this idea of anthropology and apply it to other fields and have great success with it.
Wonderful. So thank you so much for joining me today, for taking the time to share your thoughts and experiences. It was really a pleasure to talk to you and to learn more about you.
Thank you, Marina, and I hope you enjoy this. We'll talk again soon.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, take care.